Olivia once lived a perfect life with her mother, Clara, in a warm home filled with laughter and love. Her mother always taught her to be proud of herself, never bowing to difficulties. In the evenings, they would read books about great women, those who overcame adversity and rose strong. For Olivia, the world was vibrant, joyful, and full of hope until her mother married Victor. Victor was a cold and distant man. He never truly cared for the two of them, always maintaining an invisible distance that made Olivia feel uneasy. But no matter how suspicious she was, she never imagined that her life would change forever in a way she couldn't possibly fathom. One day, tragedy struck. Clara died in a car accident. No more mornings filled with the smell of baking pastries. No more warm hugs each night. But the strangest part was Victor's reaction. He didn't cry, didn't grieve. He simply announced that her mother was dead and that from now on, she would live with him. Everything changed completely. The house that was once filled with light suddenly became dark and cold, as if all traces of her mother were slowly vanishing. But was it truly just an accident, or was there a terrible secret being concealed? And why did Victor seem so indifferent to this loss? Stay tuned until the end of the story, because the truth that Olivia is about to uncover will leave everyone shocked. Don't forget to follow so you don't miss the next developments. The early morning sun crept through the window, bathing the small kitchen where Olivia and her mother, Clara, often began their day with warm conversations. The scent of freshly baked goods blended with the gentle aroma of coffee, creating a soothing atmosphere. Olivia sat on the chair, swinging her little legs, watching her mother bustle around preparing breakfast. Clara always had a gentle beauty, one that hid an inner strength, a woman who could turn everything around her into love. Her long, shiny hair was tied neatly behind her, and her deep brown eyes sparkled with joy whenever she looked at her daughter. "Do you know what today is?" Clara asked, setting a plate of pancakes covered in honey in front of Olivia. The little girl furrowed her brow, pretending to think, then exclaimed, "It's Friday. The weekend's almost here." Clara laughed and patted her daughter's head. "So, do you remember your promise? This afternoon, I'll pick you up early, and we'll go to the park." Every time Olivia heard about the park, she couldn't hide her excitement. She loved those afternoons, running on the grass, watching paper boats drift lazily on the lake, feeling the cool breeze through her hair. That was their world, a small one but full of happiness. On the way to school, she chattered away about the lesson the day before, about her new teacher who taught them how to plant trees, about the neighbor's cat that she adored. Clara listened carefully, occasionally chuckling at her daughter's innocence. When the car stopped in front of the school gate, she bent down, adjusted the collar of Olivia's uniform, then gently placed a kiss on her forehead. "Be a good girl. I'll pick you up early." Olivia smiled brightly, waved goodbye to her mother, and ran inside, never knowing that it would be the last time she'd see that smile. The morning passed as usual. Olivia did her homework, participated in gym class, and chatted with her friends during recess. But by midday, as she was sitting in class drawing, the door suddenly opened. The principal walked in with a serious expression, her eyes filled with an indescribable sadness. The teacher nodded slightly before turning to look at Olivia, her gaze full of concern. "Olivia, will you come with me for a moment?" A feeling of unease began to creep into Olivia's heart as she stood up, her steps suddenly heavy. She didn't understand what was happening, but the way everyone was looking at her made her stomach twist. When the principal's office door opened, Olivia saw a familiar figure. Victor stood there, hands in his pockets, his cold gaze looking out the window. Olivia hesitated before stepping inside, her eyes scanning the room, waiting for an explanation. But no one spoke immediately. Her mother was not there. There were no warm smiles that she had expected, only a heavy atmosphere surrounded them. The principal sat across from her, her voice gentle, yet there was something about it that made Olivia feel incredibly uneasy. "Olivia, there's something I need to tell you." The little girl held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Your mother," the principal paused slightly, as if trying to find the right words. But Victor didn't let her finish. "Your mother is dead." The room suddenly fell into a chilling silence. Those words hit Olivia like a punch, making her stagger. She couldn't believe her ears. Her mother dead? No, it couldn't be. This morning, her mother had kissed her forehead, had promised to pick her up after school. No, My mom can't be dead. You're lying. Her voice trembled, her eyes wide with panic. But Victor showed no sign of sympathy. His face remained as cold as ever, as if he had just stated an obvious fact. It's true. A car accident. She didn't survive. The principal placed her hand on Olivia's shoulder, trying to comfort her, but at that moment, all the little girl could feel was the world crashing down around her. There were no loud cries of grief, no one to hold her and say everything would be okay. Only Victor, the man she had never liked, stood there with an expression of indifference. Olivia felt an overwhelming sense of fear, not just from the loss itself, but from the way Victor delivered the news. There was no sorrow, no condolences, not even a comforting embrace. Why was he so detached? And why did everything happen so quickly? These questions gnawed at her mind, but at that moment, the pain of losing her mother was so immense that she couldn't think of anything else. Olivia's small hand clenched the hem of her dress, her wide eyes fixed on Victor, as if hoping he would say this was all just a cruel joke. But when she realized no one was disputing this, no one was telling her it wasn't true, her tears silently fell. She began to cry, each sob echoing in the small room. But Victor remained still, showing no intention of comforting or soothing her. "Pack your things," he said, his voice void of emotion. "From now on, you will live with me." There were no questions about how she was feeling, no choices given to her. Olivia had not only lost her mother, but she had also lost the familiar world, the safety and warmth she once knew. Her hand trembled as she wiped away her tears, but the more she wiped, the more they fell. She felt as if she were falling into an endless abyss, one where no one could save her. A rising fear gripped Olivia, a fear not only from the fact that her mother was gone, but from the very man standing before her. She didn't know what awaited her next, but deep inside, Olivia had a terrible feeling. She couldn't quite name it, but something was terribly wrong, and she would soon realize that her mother's death was not just an accident. The entire ride home, Olivia sat in silence in the back seat, clutching her backpack to her chest, as though it were the only thing keeping her upright in the face of a storm. She didn't cry, didn't say a word, but in her mind, thousands of questions whirled uncontrollably. Had her mother really died? Just this morning, she had smiled, kissed her forehead, and promised to pick her up soon. How could everything change so suddenly? She wanted to ask Victor, to shout at him that he was lying, that this was all just a bad dream she would soon wake from. But when she looked through the rearview mirror, Victor's face remained expressionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead without a trace of sorrow or regret. He didn't speak a single word to her the entire ride, showing no intention of comforting or explaining. An uncomfortable feeling grew in Olivia's chest, an unease she couldn't quite name. The car stopped in front of the familiar house, but as soon as Olivia stepped out, she felt something was wrong. It wasn't that the house had changed, but that it had lost its soul. The door was still the same one she passed through every day. The steps were still the place her mother used to stand, waiting for her after school. But everything suddenly felt empty. There was no warm light spilling from the windows, no soft music playing in the kitchen as Clara cooked. Olivia stood still for a long moment, trying to feel some warmth from the house, but all she sensed was a suffocating silence. When Victor opened the door and stepped inside, Olivia slowly followed, but each step felt heavier. Inside, everything seemed intact, but it felt eerily unfamiliar. The family photos still hung on the walls, but they seemed lifeless. The kitchen, where her mother had once stood cooking, was now dark, devoid of the warmth of family meals. A cold atmosphere enveloped everything, as if in just one day, this house had become a completely different place. Victor tossed the keys onto the table, removed his coat, and sighed as if he had just come home from a tiring day at work, while Olivia remained frozen at the door. She waited for some words from him, for a sign of comfort, a hint of sadness. But Victor simply opened the fridge, grabbed a can of beer, and sat on the sofa, turning on the TV as if nothing had happened. Olivia couldn't believe her eyes. Could he really be acting this way? Her mother had just died, and he didn't shed a single tear. She bit her lip, trying to suppress the frustration rising in her chest. "Aren't you sad?" The question slipped out before she could think. Victor glanced at her, his face still expressionless. "She's dead. Nothing will change by being sad," he said flatly, his voice so emotionless that it sent a chill down Olivia's spine. She stared at him, trying to find something on his face, some sign that this was just a mask, that deep down, he too was grieving. But no, nothing. Just absolute coldness. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't understand how someone could be so indifferent. Her mother had been his wife, yet he hadn't shed a single tear, hadn't uttered a word of sorrow, not even a moment of grief. A sense of doubt began to creep into her heart. If he truly loved her mother, he wouldn't be this calm. Could it be there was something she didn't know? She wanted to ask, to dig deeper into what was happening, but a vague fear held her back. Victor didn't seem like the kind of man who would patiently answer her questions. If she continued, would he get angry? And if he did, what would happen? She bit her lip, trying to hold back the remaining tears. She had cried enough already, but now she couldn't afford to be weak. There was no one here to comfort her anymore, no mother, no warm embrace to lean on. She realized that from now on, she would be alone. Go to bed, Victor said, his tone unchanged. Olivia clenched her fists but didn't reply. She quietly turned and climbed the stairs, her small feet dragging a heavy sadness behind her. The door to her room closed behind her, and she stood motionless in the dark, feeling how cold the room had become. There was no mother, no soft humming at night, no scent of jasmine on the pillow, no hugs when she woke up. This room was still hers, but it was no longer the place she once loved. Olivia walked to the bed, sat down, and stared blankly at the ceiling. For the first time in her life, she felt trapped in her own home, and the scariest part was the feeling that this was just the beginning. On her first night without her mother, Olivia curled up on the bed, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Everything in the room was just as it had been, but there was no warmth left from her mother. The room that had once been the safest place for her was now filled with a cold, heavy, and gloomy darkness. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks, with no one there to wipe them away, no one to comfort her as she had always been comforted after bad dreams. Each time she closed her eyes, she thought of her mother, her gentle face, her warm voice, her soft hands soothing away even the smallest of worries. But this time, the pain was too great, and there was no one there to tell her that everything would be okay. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, trying to find some lingering warmth in the room, but everything now felt like an endless void. She remembered that morning, how her mother had hugged her tightly and promised to pick her up soon. But now her mother was gone, and Olivia didn't know how to keep going without her by her side. She waited, hoping the door would open, that Victor would come in and tell her it had all been a mistake, that her mother was still alive, that she didn't have to endure this pain alone. But outside, the house was terrifyingly silent. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to hold back her sobs, but even trying to be strong, her little heart couldn't bear this overwhelming loss. She needed someone beside her, needed an embrace, someone to tell her that everything would be okay. She waited for Victor, hoping that just for a moment, he would care about her. But instead, all she received was cold indifference. Outside the door, the sound of the TV still played on steadily. Victor remained seated, unbothered by her presence. There were no questions about whether she was okay, no words of encouragement, no sympathetic glance. When Olivia descended the stairs with her red eyes, her voice trembling as she called out, "Uncle Victor," he didn't even turn around. She stood there, waiting for something, some sign of care, some responsibility, some comfort. But all she received was a curt, emotionless response. "Go back to your room. Take care of yourself." Those words felt like a knife straight to Olivia's heart. She swallowed her tears, feeling as if she had been pushed out of the world of those who were loved. If before, when she was sick or had a nightmare, her mother would always hold her and soothe her until she slept peacefully, now she was alone. She realized that from now on, no one would be there to ease her pain. Slowly, she turned around, each step heavy as it dragged her back to the empty room. When the door closed behind her, she realized that no one was waiting outside. No one would check to see if she was asleep. No one would tuck her in with a warm blanket or wish her a good night. The darkness filled the room, and in her heart, it did too. Olivia burrowed deep into the blanket, burying her face in the pillow her mother had bought for her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find that familiar scent anymore. For the first time in her life, She truly understood what it meant to be alone. In the days following her mother's death, Olivia began to realize that Victor was not only indifferent, but also began imposing new rules on her life. Everything she had once known and loved was changing rapidly. He controlled every meal, set strict schedules that she had to follow. Breakfast was no longer the pancakes her mother used to make. Instead, there were dry slices of bread and a carton of milk left on the table. Every night, instead of the bedtime stories, she was left with empty silences and the dim glow of the hallway light. She wasn't allowed to leave the house without permission, and even her conversations with friends over the phone were limited. Everything felt suffocating, like she was locked in an invisible cage that no one else could see. But what hurt Olivia the most was how Victor tried to erase all traces of her mother from the house. One afternoon, when she came home from school, she found her mother's wardrobe completely empty. Those dresses her mother used to wear when they went for walks were gone. The family pictures had been taken down, replaced with soulless paintings she had never seen before. Even the books her mother used to read to her before bed were no longer on the shelf. She searched the house frantically, hoping that Victor had simply put them away somewhere, but there was nothing. When she turned to ask him, all she got in return was a cold look and a blunt reply, "You don't need those things anymore." Olivia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mother's keepsakes weren't just objects. They were the final pieces that helped her hold on to the memory of her. "You can't do this. Those are my mother's things," she shouted, her voice breaking with anger and despair. But Victor didn't care. He glared at her, his voice filled with irritation. "Listen carefully. From now on, you're not to mention Clara again. She's dead, and that's where it should stay, with her." His words were as cold as a blade, cutting into her heart. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, but couldn't do anything but remain silent. Olivia wanted to scream, to fight back, to keep whatever little piece of her mother was left, but Victor's icy gaze made her step back. She felt more powerless than ever, as if everything that once belonged to her was being stripped away piece by piece. She knew that if she argued, Victor wouldn't hesitate to punish her. The house, once so familiar and comforting, was increasingly becoming a tomb to her. And the most painful realization of all was that her mother hadn't just been taken away by an accident. She was being erased from Olivia's memory as though she had never existed at all. In the days that followed, Olivia slowly realized that Victor wasn't just cold. He was completely indifferent to her existence. He no longer cooked dinner like her mother used to, nor did he bother to check if she had eaten. Every morning, she would wake up and find only a cold slice of bread and a carton of milk on the kitchen table, as though he was only fulfilling the bare minimum duty to ensure she didn't starve. On the days Victor wasn't home, Olivia had to rummage through the cupboards to find something to eat, but most of the time, it was just canned food and tasteless dried goods. Sometimes she was so hungry that she had no choice but to chew on the dry bread, tears silently streaming down her small face. She began to feel afraid in her own home. Every corner of the house that had once been filled with memories of her mother now seemed empty and cold. The walls felt taller, farther, trapping her in an invisible space that she couldn't escape. Every time she passed Victor, she felt an invisible pressure weighing heavily on her chest, forcing her to hold her breath. He didn't hit her, didn't yell at her often, but his indifference was more terrifying than any scolding. She had never felt so alone. At school, Olivia was no longer the cheerful, lively girl she once was. She no longer chatted with her friends, nor did she join in the games during recess. When the teacher asked her a question, she would lower her head and respond quietly, hoping no one would notice her. But her silence became more and more noticeable. The other kids began to whisper behind her back. "She looks weird," one of them said softly. Probably because her mom died. Those whispers gradually turned into rejection. Olivia had once had a close group of friends to play with in the schoolyard, but now no one invited her anymore. She could only sit in a corner, watching the other children play, unable to join in. One time, while standing in line at the cafeteria, she heard a voice behind her. "I heard her mom died." Olivia froze, her heart pounding. She didn't turn around, but she could clearly hear the giggling of the other children. No wonder she always looks like a ghost. She wanted to say something, to argue back, but her mouth felt shut tight. The lump in her throat grew, and all she could do was clench her fists, trying to hold back her tears. When it was her turn to get food, she just took a carton of milk and a small piece of bread, then quietly walked away. With each passing day, she sank deeper into a feeling of isolation. She couldn't confide in anyone, no one asked after her, and slowly, she stopped expecting anyone to. Even when the teachers noticed that she was becoming more withdrawn and seemed uninterested in her lessons, they simply thought she was grieving her mother's death. No one knew that in what should have been her home, Olivia was struggling with an ever-growing fear in her heart. And worst of all, she didn't know when it would ever end. That afternoon, Olivia sat alone under the large tree in the schoolyard, as she did every day. She had grown used to being left behind, accustomed to the curious stares from the other children, familiar with the sneers and whispers that she didn't even need to hear clearly to know they were talking about her. But at least when she sat there quietly, eating her dry bread, no one bothered her. But today was different. "Olivia, what's with you, always sitting by yourself?" a mocking voice called out. Olivia looked up and saw a group of 3 or 4 children from her class. Leading the pack was Jessica, the girl who always saw herself as the most popular one at school. Her shiny blonde hair glistened in the sun, and the half-smirk on her face made Olivia feel like something unpleasant was coming. "Aren't you bored? Or is it that no one wants to play with you?" Another one of them laughed, and the rest just stood by, waiting for the next round of ridicule. Olivia lowered her head, hoping that if she didn't respond, they would leave her alone. But that only seemed to make Jessica more entertained. "She's always like this," Jessica continued, her voice drawn out and sarcastic. "Always silent, always looking down. Do you even know how to look up, Olivia?" She tilted her head, pretending to be curious. "I bet you don't, right? Because even if you did, you'd still be that weird girl no one wants to be around." A burst of laughter echoed around her, as if her humiliation were a joke. But the worst was yet to come. Another boy, Michael, stepped closer, narrowing his eyes at Olivia's naturally curly hair before sneering. "Her hair looks like a bird's nest. Probably hasn't brushed it in days." Jessica laughed again. "Yeah, right. Don't you know how to take care of yourself, Olivia? Or maybe because no one's there to teach you anymore." Those words froze Olivia in place. A chill ran down her spine. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, but still couldn't stop the lump that formed in her throat. Those words, they were too familiar. "You look like a beggar. You don't know how to take care of yourself. No one wants to look at someone like you." Those weren't just words coming from the children in front of her. They were the exact things Victor had told her every day. And now, these children were repeating them. Suddenly, the world felt like it was spinning. She wanted to scream, to tell them to shut up, to run away from here. But all she could do was sit still, letting those harsh words seep into her mind, slowly eroding whatever was left of her. "All right, let's go," Jessica said to her group, clearly bored when she saw Olivia not react. "Playing with a weird girl like this is just a waste of time." The children left, leaving Olivia there, staring blankly at the ground. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, but because it felt like there were no more tears left. Olivia slowly came to a terrifying realization. Victor didn't need to shout at her every day to make her feel worthless. All he had to do was plant those cruel words in her head, and the world around her would continue the job. People would look at her with disdain, repeat what he had said, and make her believe she was truly nothing. For the first time in her life, Olivia asked herself, is that true? Is she really just a useless child, unwanted and uncared for? And if that's true, then what reason does she have to keep existing? That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. The room was pitch black, save for the light from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows on the ceiling. She lay still, her eyes wide open, listening to even the smallest sounds around her. The silence in this house had never made her feel safe. On the contrary, it terrified her. In recent days, she had learned that silence often foretold something bad. She shifted in bed, trying to fall asleep, but then a faint sound echoed from the staircase. At first, it was just a whisper, but gradually she recognized it as Victor's voice. He was on the phone. The mix of curiosity and anxiety made Olivia sit up. She carefully climbed out of bed, her bare feet lightly pressing on the wooden floor to avoid making a sound. Victor's voice drifted up from the living room, low and curt. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to listen more closely. "She doesn't know anything. The insurance money will come soon." His voice was cold, casual, as if discussing a normal transaction. But to Olivia, each word felt like a knife stabbing straight into her chest. She stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yeah, I told you. Everything's going perfectly. The cops suspect nothing. Just wait a couple more weeks." Victor chuckled softly. The sound sent a chill down Olivia's spine. "Ya lucky everything ended so neatly." Olivia's hand gripped the wall tightly, her body feeling like stone. She understood exactly what he was saying. Insurance money. No suspicion. Neatly ended. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she connected the dots. She had thought her mother's death was a tragic accident, but now she wasn't so sure. She bit her lip, trying to suppress the rising panic. If this wasn't an accident, then it meant Victor had planned it. It meant he had intentionally done something to her mother. A terrifying thought flashed in her mind, but she immediately tried to push it away. No, it couldn't be true. No one would do that. No one could kill someone just for money. But the truth was, Victor hadn't mourned. He didn't cry, didn't show any regret, and had coldly ordered her to forget her mother. He had erased every trace of her mother in this house, as if she had never existed. And now he was talking about insurance money, talking about how everything had ended perfectly. Olivia's breath became shallow. She wanted to run straight to the police, to scream that her mother hadn't died in an accident. But she knew she couldn't. She was just a child, and Victor was her only legal guardian. If she spoke up, who would believe her? She backed away, trying not to make a sound. Her heart was beating so fast she feared Victor could hear it. She knew that from this moment on, she couldn't trust him anymore. And worse, if Victor had really killed her mother, what would stop him from doing the same to her? Olivia turned quickly, running back to her room, closing the door gently, then huddling on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Her whole body was trembling. She didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain: she was no longer safe. The next day, Olivia couldn't focus on anything. Victor's words from the night before kept echoing in her head, each one like broken shards of glass lodged deep in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about them. Insurance money. No suspicion. Neatly ended. Every time she recalled his indifferent tone, a chill ran down her spine. Had her mother really been harmed? If so, how could she stay silent? But if she spoke up, would anyone believe her? She began paying more attention to Victor, but it seemed like he sensed it. His gaze when he looked at her had changed, as if he were suspicious of something. Whenever she went into the kitchen while he was on the phone, he immediately fell silent. If before, Victor had mostly ignored her presence, now he was watching her every little move. When she stood in the living room longer than usual, he would furrow his brow and ask, "What are you standing there for?" When she passed by his office, the door would immediately be shut. She couldn't deny one truth. Victor was becoming more cautious, and that only made her believe she was right. She needed to do something, but she couldn't do this alone. She needed someone she could trust, someone who could help her uncover the truth. And there was only one name that came to her mind: Grandmother Matilda. Grandmother Matilda was Clara's mother, and although she wasn't young anymore, she was a strong woman. Before her mother passed away, she would visit them every weekend, bringing freshly baked goods and telling Olivia stories about her mother's childhood. She loved her daughter more than anything, and she also loved Olivia. If anyone could help her, it was her. But approaching her wouldn't be easy. Since her mother passed away, Victor had limited all contact between her and her grandmother. Matilda had called a few times, but Victor always answered the phone, and each time the conversation would last only a few seconds before he hung up with the excuse, "Olivia is busy." She couldn't call her grandmother from her own phone, as Victor controlled everything. She had only one chance: to meet Grandmother Matilda in person. She planned carefully. Every morning, when she went to school, she would check the school gate to see if her grandmother was there. Matilda had come to her school once after her mother's death, but Victor had quickly pulled her away before they could speak. If she came back, Olivia had to meet her at all costs. One day during recess, as she was sitting alone in the corner of the schoolyard, Olivia suddenly heard a familiar voice from a distance. She looked up, her heart racing, as she saw Grandmother Matilda standing outside the school gate, talking to a teacher. Without thinking, she immediately stood up and ran quickly toward the gate. But before she could get there, a rough hand grabbed her arm, pulling her back. It was Victor. His eyes were dark, his lips pressed tight in anger. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was low and sharp, like a warning. Olivia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Grandmother Matilda was right there, only a few meters away, but with Victor's tight grip on her arm, that distance suddenly felt like an eternity. What should she do now? If she didn't act right this moment, she might never have another chance. That evening, as Matilda sat alone in her home, her mind raced with questions and doubts. The more she thought about it, the more something felt horribly wrong. From the moment Clara passed away, she had suspected that the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death were not as straightforward as they seemed. Victor's hasty announcement of Clara's death without a single tear shed had troubled her. He had forbidden Olivia from contacting her and even restricted their meetings. But why? A typical stepfather wouldn't behave like this. Matilda decided she had to find out the truth. She started by visiting an old friend at the police department, asking him to review the accident report. As the documents were laid out in front of her, one detail stood out, a detail that deepened her unease. According to the report, Clara's car had lost control and crashed into a median, but there were no signs of braking before the collision. This was odd. Someone with as much driving experience as Clara would surely have reacted when the car malfunctioned. But Matilda didn't stop there. She visited the garage where Clara's car had been towed after the crash. As she looked at the wreckage of the car, something caught her eye, a disturbing detail. The brake system appeared to have been tampered with before the accident occurred. The uneasy feeling in her grew stronger. If the brakes had been sabotaged before the crash, then this was not an accidental incident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the car. Matilda clenched her fists, a surge of anger rising in her chest. If her instincts were correct, Clara's death wasn't an accident. And if that was the case, only one person had a motive for such an act: Victor. She knew she couldn't waste any more time. She had to protect Olivia before it was too late. That evening, dinner was marked by a chilling silence. Victor sat across from Olivia, slowly and deliberately cutting a piece of meat on his plate, as if performing some cold ritual. Olivia didn't look at him, only lowering her head and pushing the cold slice of bread around on her plate with an old fork. Every dinner with Victor felt like an ordeal, not because the food was bad, but because the atmosphere in the kitchen was suffocating, making it hard for her to breathe. But tonight, Olivia had made a decision. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart race so quickly that she could hear it echoing in her head. "I saw Grandma Matilda today," she said quietly, her voice trembling but clear enough for Victor to hear. He stopped, the knife in his hand pausing midair. The tension in the room increased instantly. "What did she say?" Victor asked, his voice low, with a hint of something dangerous lurking beneath it. Olivia gripped her hands tightly under the table, trying to steady her voice. "She wants to know more about Mom." "I do too." She paused, took another breath, then continued. "That day, when Mom had the accident, did she say anything to you? Was she scared? Did she bang?" The sudden noise made Olivia flinch. Victor slammed the knife down onto the table, his eyes darkening. "How many times do I have to tell you?" he growled, his voice no longer controlled. "Clara is dead. It's over. You don't need to ask anymore." Olivia looked up at Victor, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel just fear. She felt anger. She didn't understand why he was so angry. If her mother really died in an accident, then why did he lose control every time she mentioned her? "But I want to remember Mom," she shouted, her voice louder than usual. "Why won't you ever talk about her? Why did you throw away everything of hers? Did you ever love my mom?" Victor stood up abruptly, making his chair scrape against the floor and slam into the wall. Olivia froze, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. His eyes were filled with rage, but deep inside, she saw something else: fear. "You don't need to know those things," Victor hissed, each word stabbing through the air. "You don't need to dig up the past. Do you understand?" Olivia felt her body tremble, but not out of fear. Instead, because she realized something. She was right. Victor was hiding something. If he had nothing to hide, he wouldn't have reacted so violently. If her mother's death had truly been an accident, why would he forbid her from bringing it up? Olivia clenched her fists, feeling a small flame of determination spark inside her. She didn't know how she would uncover the truth, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't stop. 3 days later, Matilda stood at the door of Victor's house. She no longer hesitated. The brief encounter at the school gate, the pleading look in Olivia's eyes, had been enough for her to understand that her granddaughter was not safe living with this man. And after discovering the disturbing signs surrounding Clara's death, she knew she had to act immediately. The door opened, and Victor stood there, a scowl on his face, as if he had anticipated her arrival. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cold. But in his blue eyes, Matilda saw a flicker of discomfort, perhaps even worry, that only confirmed for her that she was doing the right thing. "I want to see Olivia," she said firmly. "And I've already filed for a court order. I will gain custody of my granddaughter." Victor scoffed, as if she had just said something absurd. "You're wasting your time. You think you can gain custody of a child? A senior like you, living on a pension, with no financial means or the ability to care for a child." He crossed his arms, leaning against the door frame, his tone full of challenge. Matilda remained unshaken. "Perhaps I'm not as rich as you," she said, looking Victor straight in the eyes, unwavering. "But I have something you don't: true love for Olivia. And I can prove that you have abused and neglected her. I won't let my granddaughter live in fear for another day." Victor squinted, his lips tight. He stood in silence for a moment, but then suddenly burst into laughter. "You really think the court will side with you?" His voice dripped with disdain. "You're too old, too weak, and no one in the court will hand over a child to someone like you. I'll prove to the judge that you're unfit to care for her, and then you'll never see her again." His words were a threat, but Matilda didn't flinch. She had raised Clara, and she knew what a child needed to grow up in a safe, loving environment. And more than anything, she wasn't afraid of Victor. "We'll see about that," she said, before turning and walking away. Victor stood motionless, watching her with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Matilda could feel it, but she also knew that this battle had only just begun. 3 days later, the courtroom atmosphere was suffocating, and Olivia felt like she could hardly breathe. She sat next to Grandma Matilda, her small hand gripping the edge of her coat, seeking any semblance of safety amidst the storm. In front of her, Victor sat eerily calm, his hands neatly placed on the table, his cold, unwavering gaze. He wasn't afraid, and that made Olivia even more anxious. The trial proceeded with intense arguments. Victor's lawyer presented a series of reasons to prove that Grandma Matilda was unfit to care for Olivia. They claimed she was too old, had no stable income, and couldn't provide a suitable environment for a child. They painted a picture of Matilda as a stubborn old woman clinging to the past, unwilling to accept that Victor was her legal guardian. On Matilda's side, her lawyer presented evidence of the neglect and emotional abuse that Victor had inflicted on Olivia. Testimonies from teachers, neighbors, and photos of the empty house and the meager meals Olivia had to endure were shown in court. But it still seemed not enough. Victor sat there, calm as ever, as if everything were going according to his plan. And that made Olivia realize one thing. He wasn't afraid of losing because he believed no one could stand against him. She looked over at Grandma Matilda, noticing the deep concern in her grandmother's eyes. If Matilda lost, that would mean Olivia would have to return to Victor. And if that happened, she knew he wouldn't leave her alone. A horrifying thought flashed through her mind. Her mother hadn't escaped him. If she didn't do something now, would her fate be the same as her mother's? Her blood rushed to her head, and for the first time in her life, fear gave way to anger. Without warning, she stood up. The entire room fell silent. Every eye in the courtroom turned to the small girl, her hands trembling but her gaze firm and unyielding. The judge looked over his thick glasses, his voice slow but serious. "Do you wish to say something, Olivia?" Olivia took a deep breath and spoke, no longer trembling. "He killed my mom." The courtroom erupted. A gasp spread among the attendees. Victor immediately stood up, his usually composed face turning pale. "She's lying," he shouted, his voice cracking, completely losing control. "This girl is making things up." But Olivia didn't stop. She looked directly at the judge, beads of sweat on her forehead, but her voice clearer and stronger than ever. "I heard him on the phone. He said the insurance money would be coming soon. He said the police didn't suspect anything. I heard him. He did something to my mom's car." Olivia's words exploded like a bomb in the courtroom. Grandma Matilda put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide in shock. The judge glanced at his lawyer, then looked at Victor, his eyes now sharp. One of the assistant judges sitting beside him started jotting something down in his notebook. Court staff whispered among themselves, and a police officer standing nearby started walking toward Victor. Victor was panicking. I don't know what this girl is talking about. He tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that he was terrified. The judge slammed his gavel onto the desk. The court will order a reinvestigation into the death of Clara Green. I will also temporarily suspend Mr. Victor Green's guardianship over Olivia until the investigation results are concluded. The room fell silent for a moment before murmurs spread through the crowd. Victor stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, unable to believe what was happening. Olivia looked at him, and for the first time in her life, she saw fear in his eyes. This time, he was the one who was scared. The courtroom was silent for a few seconds after Olivia's accusations. No one could believe what they had just heard. Whispers began to spread through the room, rolling out like a wave. Some people gasped, while others stared at Victor, the man who had remained composed throughout the trial, now pale as a ghost. The judge slammed his gavel on the desk 3 times in quick succession, demanding order. Silence. Order in the courtroom. His voice rang out, powerful and authoritative. Olivia could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Her legs were still trembling, but her gaze remained steady. She had kept this secret for too long, been afraid for too long, and now was the time to say it all. Victor jumped to his feet, his face contorted with a mix of rage and panic. Your Honor, this girl is lying. She's being manipulated by that old woman. This is just a cheap act to strip me of my guardianship. He pointed accusingly at Matilda, but she remained seated, her expression as hard as stone. There was no need to say more. Olivia had said it all. The judge looked at Olivia, his gaze stern but also soft, with a hint of gentleness. Are you sure about what you just said, Olivia? Olivia swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I heard him talking on the phone. He was talking about the insurance money. He said the police didn't suspect anything. I know he did something to my mom's car. Her voice didn't tremble, even though her heart was filled with fear. But at this moment, she couldn't stop. The judge turned to the police representative and ordered, I request that the investigation into the death of Clara Green be reopened immediately. The police will re-examine the accident scene and consider all possibilities. He slammed the gavel down once more. Until the investigation results are concluded, Victor Green's guardianship will be suspended immediately. A police officer standing nearby stepped forward and placed a hand on Victor's shoulder, a subtle warning that things had changed. He was no longer in control of this courtroom. Victor stood frozen, looking around the room as though searching for an escape. But this time, no one was standing with him. The atmosphere in the courtroom was as tense as a drawn bowstring. When the police officer placed his hand on Victor's shoulder, as if waiting for a signal to take action, Victor stood motionless, his face pale. But then his expression darkened, revealing his rising fury. He knew everything was slipping beyond his control. Olivia, the girl he had always seen as weak and easily manipulated, had just destroyed all his plans with a single accusation. The police lawyer quickly presented the newly discovered evidence after reopening the accident file on Clara. The car's brake system had been tampered with. The forensic results showed clear signs of deliberate brake line cutting, not a technical fault as initially reported. Notably, there were Victor's fingerprints on some of the parts that had been tampered with. The courtroom erupted into furious whispers. It was no longer a mere suspicion. This was murder. Grandmother Matilda gripped Olivia's hand tightly, her eyes red but filled with determination. After so many days of doubt and searching for the truth, she finally had an answer. Clara hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered by the very man she had once trusted. The judge turned to the police. With this clear evidence, I hereby order the immediate arrest of Victor Green for murder, insurance fraud, and child abuse. Victor sprang to his feet, his face turning red with rage. No, you can't do this to me, he shouted, his eyes wildly searching for a chance to escape. This girl is lying. They're all against me. But no one was listening to him anymore. 2 police officers advanced, handcuffing him in the courtroom. Some people in the room began to clap, while others whispered in disbelief. Victor's cold demeanor had crumbled, replaced by a desperate loser thrashing in despair. Olivia watched the scene before her, feeling something she hadn't felt in so long, relief. She no longer had to fear him. She no longer had to live in the shadows with lonely nights, cruel words that made her feel worthless. As Victor was led away, he looked back at Olivia with eyes full of hatred. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She looked him straight in the eye, not avoiding his gaze, not looking down. She had won. Grandmother Matilda squeezed Olivia's hand gently, whispering, "You did very well, my dear." Olivia didn't say anything, but a tear ran down her cheek, not because of fear or pain, but because for the first time in months, she felt truly free. After the trial, Olivia moved in with Grandma Matilda in a small house on the outskirts of town. On the first day she stepped inside, she immediately felt a stark difference compared to the cold house where she had been confined. Matilda's home wasn't big, but it was always warm. Family photos adorned the walls, light floral-patterned curtains hung from the windows, and the smell of freshly baked goods filled the air, reminding Olivia of the happier days she spent with her mother. Yet, even in a safer place, the wounds inside her heart didn't disappear easily. Nightmares continued to visit her regularly. She would wake up suddenly, gasping for breath, feeling as if she could still hear Victor's voice echoing in her head. Some days, she didn't want to leave her bed, the painful memories tightening around her mind like an invisible chain. Matilda noticed this and didn't want her granddaughter to drown in the darkness. She arranged for Olivia to attend an art therapy class for children who had experienced trauma. At first, Olivia didn't believe that drawing could help her feel better. But when she picked up a pencil for the first time in months, she realized that what she couldn't express with words could flow through every stroke of the pen. She drew her mother, recreating the warm memories she once had. The pancake breakfasts, the gentle hugs, the smiles she feared she might forget. Slowly, art became not just a way for her to express her feelings, but also a doorway leading her out of the past. One day, her art teacher saw Olivia's paintings and encouraged her to enter a local children's art contest. At first, she hesitated. Was she good enough? But Grandma Matilda took her hand, her eyes filled with love. "You have a story to tell, Olivia, and the world needs to hear it too." Olivia decided to paint a picture of her mother, one she had kept in her heart for so long. In the painting, Clara stood in the midst of a colorful garden, her soft black hair blowing in the wind, her eyes full of love, just like they had always been. When she finished the painting, Olivia felt like she had sent a message to her mother, that she still remembered her, that she was still trying to move forward. When the contest results were announced, Olivia won second place. It wasn't the highest reward, but as she walked up to receive her prize, she felt as though she had achieved something far more important, a new future. Grandma Matilda hugged her tightly, her eyes brimming with pride. "Your mother is definitely smiling down on you," she whispered. Olivia looked up at the sky, where the sun cast its warm rays. She knew her journey was far from over, but now she no longer felt afraid. She had found her strength again, and she would continue moving forward, with the memories of her mother always in her heart. Years passed, and Olivia was no longer the shy girl who always hid in the corners of fear. She had grown into a talented artist, creating paintings that not only were beautiful, but also carried deep emotional stories. The wounds of her past no longer weighed her down. They had become the inspiration that allowed her to create works that touched the hearts of thousands. When she first exhibited her artwork at an exhibition, Olivia felt her heart racing, much like the day she stood in court to accuse Victor. But this time, she didn't feel fear. She stood among her paintings, works of art about pain, loss, but also filled with hope. Each painting told a piece of her story: a girl once trapped in fear, a child who lost her mother, a person who fought to find justice. And now, she wanted those stories to help others who had gone through the same. After the exhibition, a young woman approached her, her eyes shimmering with tears. "I read your story," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I also had a childhood filled with pain, and I never thought I could stand up for myself until I saw your paintings." Olivia looked at the woman, feeling the tremble in her voice, and she realized this was why she had to keep painting. She wasn't just an artist. She was the voice of those who had been forgotten. Years later, Olivia began hosting workshops, helping children who had experienced violence and loss to express their emotions through art. She knew that not everyone could stand up and speak out like she had, but everyone deserved a way to free themselves from the darkness. During one of her teaching sessions at a center for abandoned children, she met a little girl with sad eyes, yet full of hope. The shy girl initially didn't speak a word, but when she picked up the paintbrush, the first painting she created was a portrait. a woman with eyes full of love, just like Olivia's mother. Olivia felt her heart tighten. That little girl was the image of her younger self. And in that moment, Olivia understood that her journey wasn't over. She had once been a child left in the darkness, but now she would use art to light the way for others. And with each brush stroke, each painting, she knew her mother was always watching over her, proud that she had turned pain into hope, transformed the past into a reminder so no one else would have to suffer in silence again. That afternoon, Olivia returned to the park from her childhood, the place where her mother had promised to take her on that fateful day. She walked slowly along the stone-paved path, feeling the gentle sunlight brush against her skin, carrying the warmth of a memory long past. The trees still stood tall as they once had. The wooden benches still rested by the walkway, and in a small corner, the swing her mother used to push her on remained. Olivia quietly sat down on the bench, her hand lightly brushing the smooth surface of the wood. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if trying to sense her mother's presence lingering in the air. How many times had she dreamed of this moment, sitting here with her mother, holding her hand, listening to her tell stories about strong women in the world. But this time, her mother wasn't here, and she was left alone with the memories etched deep in her heart. She lifted her head to look at the sky, where the white clouds drifted lazily. The wind gently rustled the branches, creating a soft, soothing melody, as if nature itself was offering her a song just for her. A faint smile spread across her face. "Mom," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. "I did it. I'm not afraid anymore." A stronger gust of wind blew through, making the trees sway. Olivia closed her eyes again, letting the wind caress her hair like a gentle touch from someone she loved dearly. She knew her mother could hear her. Olivia's life was no longer just a story of loss. It was also a story of hope, justice, and courage. She didn't just survive the terrifying days of her past. She transformed her pain into a beacon of light for others. From the frightened girl who once shrank in the shadows, afraid of every word and every glance from the wicked, she had become a true warrior, not with weapons or strength, but with her voice, her art, her truth. Her story spread, inspiring those who had faced injustice, helping them realize they weren't alone. Olivia continued to paint, continued to tell her story, continued to fight for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And along this journey, she always remembered the greatest gift her mother had left her, the strength to face the truth, even when it was the most painful. As Olivia left the park that day, she no longer felt abandoned. She was no longer the lost girl. She had entered a new chapter of her life, and this time, she was the one writing the next part of her story. Thank you all for following Olivia's story until the very end. This is not just the journey of a girl who was once hurt, but a powerful reminder that justice always exists, and the truth will eventually be revealed. Sometimes life may push us into darkness, but as long as we don't give up, don't let fear control us, one day the light will find its way. Olivia's story is also the story of many others out there, those who have been hurt, those who felt alone and hopeless. But remember, you are not alone. There are always people ready to listen, ready to help. And most importantly, you deserve to be loved, protected, and have a bright future. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment so we can continue spreading this message to more people. And if you want to follow more emotional stories, life lessons, and justice, be sure to click subscribe and become a part of this journey. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next stories.